day everyone, I'm Srini Naika and I'm here to assist you with the answering of your questions on short stories in the examination. We're going to look at the two different ways in which you could be tested on short stories. One is the essay and two, the contextual questions. Let me give you an overview of the type of questions that you could be asked in the examination. Firstly, questions will be set on two short stories. Secondly, there is a choice between an essay and a contextual question. The important word here to remember is that there is a choice. I will highlight that. Simply because in many instances, when learners are pressurized in the examination room, they tend to answer all the questions. So please remember that you may not complete the question paper if you answer all the questions. Stick to the instruction, and that is, there is a choice. The next very important thing to remember is that candidates must answer one question on one of the short stories they have studied. And furthermore, you will answer either the essay or the contextual question. Here again, look at the terms either or. It means you've got to answer just one question only. The total marks for this section is 35. And today I'm actually going to tell you how best you can score those marks. I will give you tips and hints as to how these sections are marked, so you will have a better idea of how you will present your answers so that the examiners will be able to actually give you a good mark for your answers. Firstly, I'd like to look at the literary essay. Now, this can pose a challenge to many learners because they do not like to write lengthy answers. But if you feel that you are confident, you're competent, you can write good essays that are meaningful and constructive, then you should actually answer the essay question because it deals with just one issue, one question, rather than looking at the contextual questions, which deals with the range of questions. What is a literary essay? Basically, a literary essay is a response. It is your response to a question or to a statement, and it is your interpretation of that question. You've got to argue your point of view and present evidence to support your answer. We will look at a typical example of an essay question, and we will analyze it in different stages. Now, a literary essay is very different to the normal creative writing essay that you are used to writing. However, there are also some similarities. In a literary essay, you've got to use the facts that are provided in the text, and you've got to support these facts with your opinions and your viewpoints. So how do you write a literary essay? As I mentioned, there are differences between your creative writing and your literary essay. When you get a topic, you've got to underline the key issues. So remember, you've got to underline the key words. These key words will direct you as to what you should write in your essay. So you keep the focus and you don't deviate from the main points. Far too often do learners focus mostly on the plot and the plot structure, and they narrate the plot and just retell the story. Now, that is not what is required in a literary essay. A literary essay requires you to interpret, to argue, and to substantiate your viewpoints. So you'll underline the key words that you're going to focus on in your essay. Once you've underlined that, you've got to plan. You've got to plan your essay, and I'll give you tips on how you're going to plan this essay in a while. And once you've planned your essay, you will structure that essay because there are different components that we're going to look at. Remember, what is very important are quotes or quotations. So it's very important for you to learn a few quotations from your short stories and use these quotations to support your viewpoints. It is also important not to have very lengthy quotations. Sometimes you might forget them and you might lose marks because of that. So keep the quotations very, very short, very precise, and very relevant. The next point I'm going to focus on now is the assessment. Now, here I'm giving you some inside information because many of us mark these exam papers. So I'm going to actually tell you how your essays are assessed. Basically, the essays are assessed on two criteria. The first one is the content. Right, firstly, the content. The content refers to your viewpoints, your understanding of the text. What did you make of the text? How did you interpret the story, basically? So that's the content. It's your understanding and the interpretation of the text. And this subsection constitutes 25 marks. So you're left with 10 more marks. And those 10 marks are given to your presentation. So that's the next aspect, the presentation. Your presentation refers to the layout of your essay. We look at the structure, which I will focus on in the next section. We also look at the flow, the logical flow of your argument. The other important thing is your grammar, your punctuation, your spelling. That is all included in the aspect of presentation. So the presentation constitutes 10 marks. So you'll find that the total for this section is 35. Now I'm going to look at the structure. And I want you to imagine this. I know many of you have very vivid imaginations. I want you to imagine that there's a very juicy, succulent burger in front of you. Okay? I'm getting you hungry, I know that. Hopefully you're going to be hungry to write this essay. Now, the first thing you'll notice, I'm going to draw a comparison between a burger and the writing of an essay. If you look at a burger, if you look at the bun at the top, that represents the introduction. The second part is the filling. The filling represents the development of your essay. What constitutes this filling? You'll find there's a burger patty, okay, there's lettuce, there's onions, there's cheese, there's sauce. So that represents the development of your essay. And finally, you've got to have a bun at the bottom. Now that bun represents your conclusion. So a burger is incomplete if it does not have any one of these aspects. So is your essay. Your essay must have an introduction, a body or development, and an effective conclusion. Now, one of the most striking things about your introduction is that it must appeal to the person who is going to mark your essay. If it is striking, it remains in the mind of the marker. If it is effective, if it is effectively created, your mark would be enhanced. It grips the attention of the reader and makes them want to read on. So focus on creating very, very constructive, eye-catching, striking introductions. Similarly, when you conclude your essay, you should have that striking conclusion as well. It must tie up all the loose ends. Okay, so your essay must seem as if it is one complete, cohesive unit, rather than it looking as being separate entities. So each paragraph must flow. It must flow from one paragraph to the next. And then you will see that your essay will be so meaningful and creative, and that is how you'll actually be able to get more marks for your presentation. So now that we've looked at the structure, I compared that to a burger, because I know many of you are familiar with burgers, and so you can use the analogy or the comparison between the creation of a burger and the writing of an essay. Let us look at the next point. Now, we'll focus on a short story. We'll focus on the short story called Manhood by John Wayne. The question here is, the main message of the story is that parents should not put too much pressure on their children. Write an essay in which you discuss the statement. In your answer, refer to specific incidents in the story. In your essay, you may consider the following ideas among others. Why Mr. Wilson puts pressure on Rob, the effect this pressure has on Rob, and the lessons that can be learned by Rob and Mr. Wilson. Now that's your essay, and I told you, when you are planning your essay, you should underline the key aspects. So what do you think might be the key aspects in this question? Yes, I'm sure you would have realized it deals with parental pressure on young people and the stress that young people go through in order to meet these demands, the demands imposed by the parents. So the main message, yes, so we look at the main message. That is what the writer is talking about, is that parents should not put too much pressure on their children. So it's about parents and the pressure that they put on their children. You've got to write an essay in which you discuss the statement. So you've got to discuss that. State whether you agree or disagree and support your viewpoints. In your answer, refer to specific incidents in the story. So you will note that you are not going to narrate or tell me a story about what happens between Rob and his father, but rather you will focus on certain incidents and you will comment on those incidents. So these are the things that you need to comment on. Why Mr. Wilson puts pressure, the reasons. What are his reasons for putting so much of pressure on his son? The effect, the results of this pressure. What are the results of that? And lessons that can be learned by Rob and Mr. Wilson. So the writer leaves us with something to think about in the end. And he leaves us with questions that you need to answer. Questions that you need to debate. Should parents actually place so much of pressure on their children? Are they justified in doing so? Or place yourself in the situation of parents. Do you think that they are wrong in placing a certain amount of pressure on young people? Can young people function without this pressure on them? Think about it. All right, so these are some of the points that you need to keep in mind when you are planning. Remember, planning is a process. Writing an essay is a process. There are different aspects to writing this essay. When it comes to planning of your essay, besides underlining the key aspects, you've got to brainstorm the topic. Pick out all the ideas that come to mind. Write them down immediately. Storm the brain. Write down all these points. Then you will draw a mind map. So you become more constructive. You will select these important points, all right, that you're going to include in your essay. So once you've selected these important points, you'll do a draft. A draft is your first effort. So once you write your draft according to the paragraphs, remember the introduction, body and conclusion, then you will do a final copy. And after you've done the final copy, you will proofread it for errors. Please remember, one important tip in an examination. When you do a draft effort, you will strike off your draft effort or write down the heading, draft effort, draft essay or planning, so that this is not marked by the examiners. Far too often do learners not draw this distinction between the planning and the final copy. Write down clearly, final copy. So the examiner or the marker would know which effort should be marked. It can become very frustrating when you do not do this. All right, so let's look at it. The introduction. Restate or introduce the topic. So introduce the topic. Very, very briefly, please. This is only an introduction. You do not write the entire essay in your introduction. And remember to have different paragraphs. Your introduction should be precise. It should relate to the topic. Include your interpretation of the topic. For example, there's an example of a beginning. In the story, Manhood, the writer depicts the harsh effects of parental pressure on children, or anything similar. You've got to create an introduction that is relevant and very precise. Let's look at the development. What are some of the points you'd keep in mind here? And there are many points. You don't have to have all these points, all right? You can choose the most appropriate ones to write. Remember, you've got to write the essay of between 250 to 300 words. And remember the time constraints that you have as well in an examination. There are many other questions that you need to answer. Look at the development. Why Mr. Wilson puts pressure on Rob. And these are some of the reasons. These are some of the points that we have. Remember, these are just points, but you've got to write them in correct sentences. As a child, Mr. Wilson was forced to study all the time. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is he did no physical exercise and he feels deprived. Next, Mr. Wilson regards physical strength as an indication of manhood. Now we can link that to the topic, to the title of the short story. It's called Manhood. Why is it called Manhood? What does manhood refer to? So the title of the story is very, very significant when you are analyzing a question, even in an essay question. Manhood refers to someone being masculine, someone being very strong. It refers to physical strength. And how do you achieve this? You achieve this in many ways. By participating in sport, that's one of the ways in which you can look very masculine, very muscular. You can have a good physique. So you'll see Mr. Wilson wanted his son, Rob, to achieve certain things that he had failed to do when he was young, because his total focus of attention was on studying. Now he wants Rob to have a balanced life. Is there anything wrong with that? Shouldn't young people participate in sport? That's a question you need to answer. He wants Rob to have opportunities he did not have as a child. Here again, if you had to make a comment, what is wrong with that? Most parents, including myself, would like young people to have certain opportunities that we didn't have when we were young people. However, we've got to draw a line there. Should we put so much of pressure on young people? So it pressurizes Rob, and we've got to ask ourselves the question, should parents impose so much of pressure on young people? Let's look at the effect this pressure has on Rob now. How does it affect Rob? Rob does not enjoy the physical activities. He does not disguise the fact that he hates these activities. So it seems like Rob is being forced to do something he does not want to do. Is that right for parents? So these are questions you've got to answer as you go along. He does not appreciate the gift his father buys for him. The sporting equipment that his father buys for him is not appreciated by him whatsoever. But he seems to be very, very deceitful, very conniving in that he does not actually tell his father about how he really feels about participating in sport. Rob does not want to disappoint his father when he is not chosen for the rugby team. So his father had dreams for him to be a part of the rugby team, but Rob does not seem to have the qualities to be a solid rugby player, and he does not succeed. So what does he do instead? He concocts a plan to deceive his father that he will now engage in boxing. And his father is overwhelmed with excitement, with joy, and encourages him to participate in boxing. And his father actually trains him and coaches him until the day in which the so-called tournament was going to take place in school. And Rob was feigned illness, and this is when he was found out that he was actually lying, that there was no real tournament. So what do we learn from this? What do we actually learn from this? We will take a look at these lessons that one can learn from the story when we come back after the ad break. Welcome back, everyone. I would now like to conclude this essay. Let's look at some of the lessons that can be learned by Rob and Mr. Wilson. Mr. Wilson should realize that parents cannot force their hopes on children. You've got to stress that point. The next lesson that we can learn here is that Rob should learn that lying does not pay. That's one of the important lessons to be learned. And honesty, linked to that honesty, is always the best option. What this simply means is that there should be adequate communication between parent and child, and that nobody is stressed or put under undue pressure to do things that they are not ready or not willing to do. And that must come out very clearly in your argument. Too much parental pressure leads to conflict and disappointment. If you look at the end, the conclusion of the story, you will find that this has actually led to Mr. Wilson being very, very disappointed with his child. Now we're going to create a conclusion. To complete the essay, to round off your most important points, we've got to have a conclusion to this essay. An example of a conclusion would be, it is evident that due to the high expectations of Mr. Wilson and the extreme pressure he puts on his son to succeed, that Rob resorts to lying to make his father proud. And here you will see there's a conflict. There's a conflict between the high expectations of the father and the extreme pressure that is felt by Rob that he resorts to lying. Can that be justified? That's what you have to state. I would now like to go on to the contextual question. If you look at the term contextual, it comes from the word context. The word context refers to a particular area where we find this particular extract. Now, when you look at an extract in the story, you've got to now figure out what happens immediately before this extract and what happens immediately after the extract. That's how you place an extract in context. So you will get a paragraph or two paragraphs, okay, that would be removed from the textbook, that will be extracted from the textbook, and questions are based on that. Now, what are some of the key points that you need to look at when analyzing a contextual question? These are some of the important aspects that you should focus on. The examiners want to see if you know and understand the text. That is what you are being tested on. Did you read the text? Did you interpret this text correctly? How good is your understanding of this text? So they want to see how you know and understand the text. That's the first thing. What you need to do is to ensure that you understand the question word. So you will underline the question word. Is it to discuss? Is it to state? Is it to examine? To illustrate? And there are many question words, and there are different responses to each question word. And the mark scheme will be according to the type of question that you are given. Look at the mark allocation. Now, the mark allocation is a guide. It guides you as to how much you should write in response to a particular question. A one-mark question, for example, for a one-mark question, you can write a one line or 2 lines. Don't write too much. Okay, you won't have time in the end to complete the paper. Similarly, for a 2-mark question, you write between 2 to 4 lines. Not much more than that. Try to answer all the questions. Do not leave any blanks. That is an error that many people make, that they think that they do not know an answer and they leave it blank. Always attempt an answer. Remember, the contextual questions are usually refer to the whole book and not only to the passage given in the examination. By that I mean that questions that are based on the extract that you find in the exam paper are not limited to that extract only. There are more general questions that you are asked when it comes to contextual questions. So you've got to have a thorough understanding of the entire story, not just that extract. Read and reread the passage. Very important. Sometimes you may be confused as to where would you place this context in the story as a whole. So you've got to read and reread until you can actually identify that. Underline the question words in the questions to make sure that you answer what is asked. The names of characters must be spelled correctly. Always check your answers and do not start your answer with because or cause. As this is a formal effort, you've got to write in complete sentences. So starting a sentence with because or cause constitutes informality, and you would lose marks in terms of that. Let us look at a typical exam question, and we'll go through the questions and look at how you should answer these questions. This question is adapted from the November 2011 paper 2. It's very important to look at past year papers. So we will look at this extract. So when you get an extract, as I mentioned, place it in context. What happens before and what happens after the extract? So you've got to read and reread the extract until you can identify that. Let's look at the extract. Our caveman lover was still at the girl while people were changing from our train to the Westgate train in New Canada. The girl wanted to get off, but the tsotsi would not let her. When the train left the station, he gave her a vicious slap across the face so that a beret went flying. She flung a leg over me and rolled across my lap in a hurtling escape. The tsotsi followed, and as he passed me, he reeled with the sway of the train. To steady himself, he put a full paw in my face. It smelled sweaty sour. Then he ploughed through the humanity of the train after the girl. Men gave way shamelessly, but one woman would not take it. She burst into a spitfire tirade that whiplashed at the men. Lord, you call yourselves men, you poltroons? You let a small ruffian insult you? Fancy, he grabs at a girl in front of you, might be your daughter. This thing with the manner of a pig. If they were real men, here they'd pull his pants off and give him such a leathering he'd never sit down for a week. But no, you let him do this here. Tonight you let him do it in your homes. And all you do is whimper. The children of today have never no respect. Sis. I think you'll be able to identify the extract. What happens before? Yes, what happens before is that we've got all these people who boarded the train, and in walks in a strange looking gentleman, and he starts to abuse a young woman. And then we get the reaction. We get two totally different reactions. One from the women and one from the men. You'll see it's two opposing ideas, but it changes when one man stands up and takes some action later on in the story. Let us look at some of the points here when you're analyzing. When you come across words and phrases that you may not be too familiar with, you need to underline those words and try and figure out what they mean in the context of the sentence. The caveman lover. Now that's a very unusual term, a caveman. A caveman refers to someone who's very primitive, someone who's barbaric. Someone very backward from the olden days. A person who's very aggressive and uses force all the time. So that young man or the tsotsi is compared to a caveman. So look at the comparison between the two. Is it an effective comparison? Looking at how aggressive he really is as well. Was still at the girl while people were changing from our train to the Westgate train in the New Canada. That gives you an idea of the setting. The girl wanted to get off, but the tsotsi. Okay, this is a typical South African word. You've got to analyze what it really means. It means someone who can be regarded as a gangster. When the train left the station, he gave her a vicious slap across the face. The word vicious suggests once again the intensity of the slap, the force of the slap, the fact that it was very, very aggressive. He was very vicious, he was very violent. It tells you a lot about his character. Someone who was very rude as well, someone who showed a lot of disrespect towards women. She flung a leg over me and rolled across my lap. Who does the me refer to? The me and the my. Yes, that of course is the narrator, someone who's actually telling us the story from his point of view. And then the other character here is the tsotsi. He followed, and as he passed me, he reeled. Let's look at the word reeled, with the sway of the train. When you reel, it means you lose your balance. If you can imagine the movement of the train moving, curving its way, and as a result, the young man loses his balance and he begins to sway off the train. He wasn't very steady on his feet. So what did he do? To steady himself, he put a full paw on my face. I'd like to highlight this word paw because it draws a comparison between the human being and an animal. An animal has paws. So what exactly is the writer telling us about this human being? This human being seems to have animal characteristics. It smells sweaty sour. Then he plowed through the humanity of the train after the girl. Here again, he was in pursuit of the girl. He was relentless in his pursuit of her. He seemed to have been obsessed with the idea of inflicting pain and harm on her. Let's see how the next paragraph reveals the attitude of the passengers towards what they had seen. The lady itself, the elderly lady, she says, "Lord, you call yourselves men, you poltroons." Now the word poltroons would suggest that these men are cowards, that they allowed this young man to abuse an innocent young woman. You let a small ruffian insult you. So it shows how insulted she was that these men, grown-up men, who some of them would have been fathers themselves, would not protect people that they see on the trains. Now you're going to ask yourself, is it their duty to protect other people? Were they afraid of the young man? Were they strong enough to protect the young person? Could they protect themselves? So these are issues that emerge from this extract. And in the end, she's so disgusted, so revolted, that she uses an expression, "sis." It shows that she was absolutely disgusted with the behavior of the men who didn't take any action. Let's look at some of the questions. The first question, refer to the story as a whole. Is the following statement true or false? And this is the statement. The narrator's journey was dull and uneventful, and give a reason to support your answer. Uneventful, let's look at that term, meaning nothing major happened, nothing of consequence happened on that day. Is it true? Was this just a normal trip on the train? No, it wasn't. So the answer would be, the answer is false, and you've got to give a reason to substantiate why you believe that the answer was false. You can say, the narrator had a frightening experience. There was a fight. Somebody was killed. A girl was attacked. There was a violent incident. You can state any one of these points and you would be correct. You would get your 2 marks for that question. You don't have to state all those points. Those are just extra points. The next question. Refer to line 1. Who is the caveman lover? I think you'll be able to identify this. This was the young man who entered the train. He was the guy who was referred to as the Tsotsi. Right. B. Why is this person described as a caveman? I've already explained what a caveman was. Someone who's very primitive, very barbaric. Someone who's very rude, aggressive. All right, so that's the caveman. Quote one word from paragraph 2, which shows that the narrator is comparing the caveman to an animal. Here again, I think you'd be able to identify. The word was paw. We'll now take an advert break, and when we come back, we'll look at more contextual questions and answers. Welcome back, everyone. We'd now like to continue our discussion of how one should go about analyzing contextual questions. Let's look at the next question. Refer to line 6. What caused the caveman to reel? I've already explained the meaning of reel in my discussion of the extract, and you will be able to gather what the answer would be. Here we are referring to the movement or the swaying of the train, which causes the young man to be unsteady. So that is what you would write as an answer there. 2.4, refer to line 11. Using your own words, explain why the woman calls the men poltroons. So you've got to explain why she calls them poltroons. And I told you that poltroons refers to someone who's a coward. Do you think that she's justified in calling them cowards? How would you react if you were placed in a situation like that? Would you defend someone that you didn't know? These are all moral issues and questions that you need to ask yourself. What answer do you expect? If you look at 2.4, they behave like cowards. They behave like cowards. They do not help the girl. They should have intervened. They should have done something about it. They should have given him a beating. Tsotsi appears to be younger than most of them, so the men should discipline him. And he is one, and they are many. Now here we find that there's a range of answers, right? You can choose any one of those answers and you'll be correct. Let's go on to 2.5. Refer to paragraph 3 of the extract. And here you've got to quote 4 consecutive words to show that the woman believes that the men have strong fatherly instincts. Now, before you answer a question, you've got to understand the question. You've got to interpret the question. So, here we are asked to quote 4 consecutive words. Now, let's look at the meaning of the word consecutive. The word consecutive simply means words in sequence. Words that follow each other. 4 words that are placed next to each other. That's consecutive. To show that the woman believes that the men have strong fatherly instincts. What is a fatherly instinct? An instinct is your natural reaction to something. When you react instinctively, it means it's a natural reaction. So what do you think the writer means by a fatherly instinct? Yes, it is how a father would protect his child. Okay, although the characters were not related, but we had father figures in the train who could have protected the girl, but they didn't initially. It was only later on that the man decided that it was time for him to get rid of the young man who was very, very troublesome. The next question. Refer to line 16. What does the use of the word sis suggest about the woman's feelings? So let's look at it. She uses the word sis in the end, and it tells you something about her feelings. Of course, she was filled with disgust and revulsion. She was filled with contempt and disgust and hatred. Now, these are some of the words you can use when you're answering that question as well. She is angry, disgusted, disapproving, contemptuous, disappointed, or upset. Any one of these answers would be correct and you would be credited with your mark. Later in the story, the attacker draws a knife when the big man confronts him. How do the following people react when they see the knife? So we get different reactions from different people. The woman was a very central figure in the story. How does she react? Let us look at it, and then the male passengers react differently as well. She shouts and she screams. She shouts, she screams, or she shrieks. And the men's reaction is very different. All they do is move out of the way or sit down. It shows that they were very neutral here. They didn't take any sides. All they did was to step backwards and allow the man to continue his interrogation or his aggressive attitude towards the women. But the women in the story reacted very angrily, as you can see. The next question here, the big man who has been sitting quietly at the time comes to life because of the incident described in the extract. Why do you think does he not react when the Tsotsi attacks a young girl? State 2 points. Now these points are not mentioned in the story, but you've got to deduce after your reading. You've got to interpret that and formulate an answer based on your interpretation. Not all answers are stated directly in the passage. There are certain answers that you've got to glean from your understanding of the entire story, or the story as a whole. What happens here is that we find many people who travel on these trains are used to incidents like this. This is a daily occurrence, so they don't react. He does not want to get involved in this incident. He has been minding his own business, humming a song. He probably thinks the two young people know each other. He feels she deserves such treatment, and her arrogance when boarding, the way she is dressed invited such treatment. So, as you will see, the answers that are formulated here are not taken directly from the passage. You've got to determine, or you've got to interpret this. The next question, what causes the big man's violent reaction later on? Why does he become violent all of a sudden? He was very withdrawn, very calm, but then something changes his mood and his attitude. What is it that changes his attitude? The disrespect shown to the older woman. The Tsotsi swearing at a woman old enough to be his mother. And also, what spurs him on to action is the fact that he was hurt. He was hurt physically. He was attacked as well. The Tsotsi wounds him with a knife. So it is only after the Tsotsi attacks him with a knife that he's spurred into action. Probably, had he not been attacked or physically harmed, he would have also been very, very neutral and accepted what had taken place on the train. Question 2.9. Do you feel sorry for the attacker who is flung from the train and probably killed? Explain your answer. Now you will also notice that this aspect or this episode is not mentioned in the extract. It only comes after the extract. So placing an extract in context, as I mentioned earlier on, is crucial. You've got to understand what happens before and what happens after the extract to get a full understanding of the extract itself. Now, this question is what we call an open-ended question. There's no definite yes or no answer. However, if you state yes or no, you've got to substantiate and support it. Your argument must be logical, it must be convincing as well. So here you are given room to state your point of view and express your thoughts. Do you feel sorry for the attacker? Now, individuals would differ when it comes to this. Your approach might be different, but it doesn't mean that you are wrong. Substantiate your answer. Let's look at possible answers here. If you said, yes, although he attacked the girl, he does not deserve to be flung from the train. So the way in which he was flung from the train is also very, very brutal. It showed that this was something that human beings do not like to see or do not like to witness. So if you said yes and you gave a correct response, substantiated well, you would be given your marks for that. If you said no, there is no excuse for being so rude to a woman or elders or people in general, or no, he got what he deserved, support your answer. So you can see there is no one definite answer. Your answer can be yes or no, but it has to be well substantiated. Then you will be credited with full marks. Let's go on to the next question. The passengers on the Dubai train choose not to get involved when the tsotsi attacks the girl. They also do nothing when he is flung from the train. Why do you think this is the case? Okay, this is a higher level question, a higher order question, which requires a lot of thought. And there are various alternatives here. And I will show you that there are many answers that you could, many answers that you could use. For example, if you said violence is part of their daily lives, they are used to it. That is why they don't react. Also, what they've noticed is that there is no respect for human life. There is no respect for women. They fear for their own lives. They do not wish to get involved in other people's lives or business. Now, these are issues that the writer brings to our attention in the story. These are points that he leaves us to ponder, to think about how human beings react whenever there is a crisis. Some people become personally involved. Other people remain aloof. They're disinterested. They're not concerned about what happens to other human beings. It's only when they are affected personally that they become involved. That brings us to the end of our section on the answering of questions on short stories. I wish that you would use the techniques that were discussed and that you would benefit greatly from this. Thank you.